Dear listener, the canyon was already there when everything else ended. That's the first thing I tell myself when I stand alone on the glass. The skywalk curves out over the void like a question mark made of steel and reinforced panels, suspended nearly 4,000 feet above the canyon floor. Tourists used to call it breathtaking. Some meant the view. Some meant the height. Most meant the way the glass made their legs shake when they looked straight down. I maintained it. Structural inspections, anchor torque checks, expansion joint calibration, cleaning the underside beams after dust storms. The platform was engineered to hold hundreds of people at once, but it required constant monitoring. Wind loads out here don't negotiate. The morning the buses stopped coming, I was beneath the platform, clipped into a safety harness, inspecting a hairline seal gap along the outer rim. The sun had just cleared the eastern cliff face, lighting the canyon walls in that deep red glow tourists love to photograph. My radio crackled once. Operations to maintenance, you seeing this? What? Seeing what? I asked, tightening a bolt half a turn to compensate for overnight temperature contraction. Highways jammed. All of it. No shuttle, Ada. We're pausing admissions. That wasn't unusual during weather closures. But there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I climbed back up to the main deck and stepped inside the gift shop corridor that connected to the visitor center bridge. The flat screens above the checkout counter were no longer looping promotional footage of Sunset Tour. They showed a news broadcast instead. The anchor's tone was tight. Reports of violent incidents across multiple urban centers. Avoid public areas, remain indoors. Behind her, footage played of traffic stalled across an interstate overpass. People were out of their cars. Some were running. Some weren't getting up. The manager turned the volume higher. The store felt smaller suddenly, fluorescent lights buzzing louder than they ever had. Another staff member tried calling the shuttle driver. No answer. We watched through the glass bridge toward the parking lot. 3 buses sat idling where they had stopped unloading. Drivers stood outside, phones pressed to their ears, faces angled toward screens that gave them nothing. By mid-morning, the decision came to evacuate staff back to the main highway before the situation escalated further. The canyon access road was narrow and single-lane in places. If traffic gridlocked up there, we'd be sealed in. Most of the team loaded into the remaining shuttle convoy. I stayed, not because I was brave, because someone had to power down non-essential systems and secure the structural equipment before leaving. The skywalk couldn't just be abandoned with open panels and unsecured maintenance hatches. Wind would rip through exposed cavities and compromise the whole frame. I'll follow in the service cart, I told them. The manager hesitated, then nodded. The buses rolled out in a line, engines echoing against canyon walls before fatting into the distance. I watched them shrink along the access road until they rounded the cliff bend and disappeared. The radio crackled once more. Traffic isn't moving, something's wrong, then static. I walked back onto the glass platform. Without tourists, the place felt alien. No laughter, no camera shutters. Just wind sweeping across open space, pushing against the curved railing. The canyon below stretched endlessly, rock strata stacked like pages of an ancient book, silent and indifferent. From this height, the world doesn't look chaotic. It looks small. I could see the highway in the distance. Even from miles away, I could tell it wasn't flowing. Vehicles were packed tight along the ridge road. Some angled sideways. Some abandoned entirely. Then I noticed something else. Movement on foot. Clusters forming where there should have been dispersal. I stepped back into the maintenance corridor and tried the radio again. Nothing but static. The canyon doesn't carry signals well once infrastructure collapses. It swallows sound, bends it, scatters it across stone. I walked to the control panel near the bridge entrance and checked the automated doors. Operational. The maintenance elevator beneath the platform hummed quietly, still connected to main power. Everything structural remained intact. Everything human did not. The day the tour buses stopped, the canyon didn't change. We did, and I was standing on glass above 4,000 feet of empty air when the world below began to fracture. I gave them 30 minutes. That was how long it usually took for a shuttle to reach the highway junction and circle back if something blocked the road. The canyon access route was narrow but predictable. Drivers knew every bend, every blind curve carved into the cliff face. 30 minutes passed, then 45. The wind picked up slightly, pushing dust across the glass panels in thin spirals. Without tourists, every sound carried farther. The hum of the air conditioning system. The faint metallic tick of expansion, joints warming under sunlight. The absence of voices. I tried the handheld radio again. Operations come in. Static. I switched frequencies. Nothing. Cell signal bars blinked in and out, too weak to hold a call. I managed to send one text, "You good?" before the connection collapsed entirely. From the edge of the platform, I could just barely see a section of the access road through a gap in the cliff formations. It took effort to angle myself correctly without leaning too far over the railing. There were vehicles stopped on the incline. Not just the shuttles. Cars were angled in ways that didn't make sense for a traffic pause. One sat perpendicular to the road, driver's side door open. Another had rolled partially onto the gravel shoulder. No one appeared to be directing anything. Then I saw movement between them. Small figures at first. Hard to distinguish at that distance. Then one fell. Another stumbled toward it. Even from miles away, I could recognize panic posture. The radio crackled suddenly, so sharp it made me flinch. "We're blocked there." The transmission cut mid-word. "Not static. Just absence." I stood frozen in the maintenance corridor, staring at the radio like it might decide to continue if I willed it hard enough. Nothing came back. The canyon road has no alternate route. One lane in. One lane out. If it jams, it seals. I walked quickly toward the glass bridge that connected the skywalk to the main visitor center structure. Halfway across, I paused. The bridge felt different without foot traffic. Every step echoed. At the far end, I pressed my face to the reinforced glass and looked down toward the visitor center parking lot. Cars were scattered there too. Doors open. No organized movement. A figure sprinted across the lot toward the canyon edge railing and then stopped abruptly, as if pulled backward by something unseen. The wind shifted, carrying a faint sound upward. Not words, just noise. I stepped back from the glass. If the shuttle convoy had been blocked on the access road, and the visitor center below was already compromised, then the only structure currently stable and elevated was the skywalk itself. The maintenance room beneath the platform was built like a vault, reinforced concrete core, steel door, no exterior windows. It housed structural monitors, cleaning systems, spare bolts, emergency lighting. It wasn't comfortable, but it was secure. I walked to the automated bridge control panel. If I left now, I might reach the service cart and try the road on foot. But the road was already gridlocked, and the movement I'd seen from above wasn't dispersing. It was converging. Height had always been the attraction here. Now it was the advantage. I powered down the bridge's automatic open cycle and engaged manual lock mode. The glass doors sealed with a hydraulic hiss. Then I turned toward the maintenance elevator that descended into the reinforced core beneath the skywalk. If I was stranded, I would be stranded above the canyon, not trapped between vehicles on a cliff road with nowhere to move. I stepped inside the elevator and pressed the lower-level access button. As the doors closed, I looked one last time through the glass at the empty platform. The shuttle never returned, and the canyon, vast and indifferent, offered only one certainty. Nothing was coming back across that road anytime soon. The maintenance room wasn't built for comfort. It was built for load. The elevator descended 30 feet below the main platform. into the reinforced concrete core that anchored the skywalk to the canyon's rock face. Tourists never saw this level. It housed stress monitors, cable tension systems, hydraulic controls, cleaning equipment, and storage racks of spare fasteners rated for more weight than most buildings ever carried. When the doors opened, the air felt different, cooler, heavier, insulated from the open wind above. If the glass deck was spectacle, this room was spine. The walls were poured concrete nearly a foot thick, reinforced with steel lattice. The only window was a narrow inspection slit facing the canyon wall itself, too small for entry and too recessed for visibility from below. The primary access door was industrial steel, with a deadbolt mechanism meant to secure equipment overnight. I stepped out and listened. Above, faint vibrations carried through the structure, wind across the railing, maybe something moving in the gift shop corridor. But down here, everything sounded muted. I walked the perimeter. 2 internal storage closets. 1 generator cabinet tied into the main power line. A manual override panel for the bridge doors. Emergency rations, limited but sealed. Several coils of industrial rope used for underside inspections. Welding kit. Portable torch. This wasn't a shelter, but it could become one. The elevator remained operational for now, humming faintly as it reset to standby mode. If power failed, it would stall. Worse, if someone from the visitor center forced their way into the skywalk, they could access this elevator and reach the core directly. 1 vertical access point. That was the first vulnerability. I opened the control panel and studied the wiring layout. The elevator ran on a separate circuit tied to the visitor center's grid feed. I could disable it manually, but once cut, it would not restart without reconnecting power from below. Commitment. I hesitated only long enough to calculate alternatives. The access road was blocked. The visitor center above showed signs of collapse. Staying exposed on the glass platform offered visibility, but not containment. Down here, steel and concrete could be controlled. I flipped the breaker. The elevator lights flickered once and died. A mechanical thud echoed upward as the car locked into position on the upper level. Without power, it would remain there. No descent. No ascent. Only the ladder shaft inside the core. Narrow, steep, not obvious to anyone unfamiliar with the structure. I moved to the steel access door and tested its deadbolt. Functional. Solid. From the control panel, I engaged manual lock override on the bridge doors above, ensuring they would not open without a power cycle. If anyone reached the skywalk from the visitor center, they would find locked glass doors and a silent elevator. If they somehow forced those doors, they would still have to find the maintenance hatch hidden behind the gift shop shelving. Layers. Fortress is not a single barrier. It is redundancy. I climbed halfway up the emergency ladder shaft and opened the maintenance hatch quietly, just enough to peer into the underside of the skywalk platform. No movement. No footsteps. Only wind sweeping across glass. I lowered the hatch and secured it from inside with a steel brace meant for equipment stabilization. Now there was only one way into this room, through the steel door. I exhaled slowly and looked around at the racks of tools and crates of bolts. Steel behind the gift shop. Tourists had once stood above this room, laughing nervously at the height. Now height was irrelevant. Concrete was everything. The canyon outside stretched for miles, indifferent to whether humans crossed it or fell into it. But this room, this reinforced core anchored into bedrock, could hold. If I reinforced it, if I committed, the world above the glass was fracturing. Down here, steel still obeyed physics. And physics, unlike people, does not panic. Fortresses aren't built in panic. They're built in sequence. The first rule was simple: remove access before removing comfort. I climbed the emergency ladder back up into the underside of the skywalk and lifted the maintenance hatch carefully. The platform above was still empty. Wind scraped fine canyon dust across the glass in soft arcs. The gift shop corridor beyond the bridge looked abandoned. Lights still on, checkout screens frozen on emergency broadcasts. That wouldn't last. I crossed the platform quickly, boots echoing sharply without tourist chatter to absorb the sound. At the far end, I reached the automated bridge doors connecting to the visitor center. They were sealed, but glass is only as strong as its frame. I accessed the side maintenance panel and manually disengaged the door track motor. Then I slid a steel alignment bar through the lower track and wedged it tight against the interior frame. Even if someone restored power from the visitor center side, the doors would not retract. Next came the emergency stairwell. The skywalk had a secondary evacuation route, a narrow exterior staircase that descended along the cliff face toward the visitor center's lower deck. It was intended for fire evacuation, not daily use. I stepped outside onto the staircase and looked down. The wind was stronger here, funneling upward from the canyon floor. From this angle, I could see figures moving around the visitor center parking lot below. One climbed briefly onto the hood of a car before being pulled backward by something unseen. I moved fast. Halfway down the staircase, I removed 3 of the lower anchor bolts from the railing support and kicked the detached section outward. It swung loose and fell, clanging violently against the cliff wall before dropping out of sight. The remaining staircase now ended in a broken, hanging segment, impossible to climb without equipment. I returned to the main platform and entered the gift shop. It felt obscene in its normalcy. Shelves of souvenir mugs, canyon postcards, branded hats, rows of bottled water near the register. I dragged 2 heavy merchandise carts from the stockroom and positioned them sideways across the corridor leading to the maintenance hatch. Then I used steel cable from a display rack to lash them together tightly, creating a barricade disguised as clutter. From a distance, it would look like panic abandonment, not deliberate fortification. I climbed down to the maintenance room and shut the steel door behind me. The deadbolt slid into place with a solid, mechanical certainty I trusted more than anything I had heard on the radio all day. But one vulnerability remained: the maintenance elevator shaft. Even disabled, someone could attempt to pry the doors open from above and climb down the cables. I returned to the control panel and opened the service cabinet. Using the welding torch, I fused the inner guide rails together just enough to prevent manual door separation without cutting equipment. It took less than 5 minutes. 5 minutes to convert vertical access into sealed steel. When I finished, the air inside the maintenance room smelled faintly of scorched metal. I opened the small inspection slit briefly to vent it, then sealed it again. Silence settled. The skywalk above would still sway in the wind. The canyon would still echo distant noise. But down here, the path from the visitor center to this room had become layered, glass doors jammed. Staircase severed. Elevator disabled. Maintenance hatch hidden behind barricade. Steel door locked. Fortress isn't about impenetrability. It's about delay. Every barrier adds time. And time is survival. I leaned back against the concrete wall and listened to the wind vibrate faintly through the structure above. The bridge was locked. The doors were jammed. The canyon stretched beneath thousands of feet of empty air. And for the first time since the shuttle failed to return, I wasn't stranded. I was secured. Locking the doors meant nothing if I starved inside them. Once the bridge and stairwell were secured, I had a narrow window, maybe hours, maybe less, before movement below reached the canyon rim again. If I was going to stay inside the maintenance core, everything I needed had to be moved there now. I unlocked the steel door and climbed back up through the hatch into the gift shop. The air smelled stale already. Emergency broadcasts still flickered silently on overhead screens. Outside the glass bridge, wind carried faint echoes upward from the visitor center parking lot. I didn't look down again. Not yet. I moved directly to the bottled water racks near the checkout counter. Each case held 24 bottles. I counted quickly, 9 full cases, 2 half empty. Tourists had been stocking up before the shuttle convoy left. Water first. I stacked 4 cases onto a merchandise cart and rolled it carefully toward the maintenance hatch corridor. The wheels squeaked loudly in the silence. I winced and paused, listening for any reaction from outside. Nothing immediate. I pushed the cart behind the barricade and lowered each case down the ladder shaft by rope, one at a time. The maintenance room floor began to fill with plastic-wrapped reserves. Next, food. The gift shop snacks were overpriced but calorie-dense. Protein bars, trail mix, jerky, candy. In the back storage room, I found sealed crates not yet shelved. I loaded 2 entire boxes of protein bars and 3 of mixed nuts into a second cart. While moving the second load, I heard something from the bridge. A sharp impact. Not wind. Glass trembled faintly. I froze beside a display rack and turned slowly. Through the narrow gap between barricade carts, I could see the glass doors at the far end of the bridge. A shape pressed against them. Then another. They weren't running. They were leaning. Testing. The steel alignment bar held. The doors did not slide, but the sound carried through the corridor like a warning. Time was shrinking. I abandoned non-essential items, souvenir food tins, decorative merchandise, and focused on utility. From the cleaning supply closet, I grabbed industrial disinfectant, trash liners, rubber gloves, and 2 sealed chemical cleaning agents that could double as sanitation treatments if diluted properly. In the first aid cabinet, I found gauze rolls, antiseptic, compression wraps, and 2 emergency trauma kits meant for tourist falls. All of it went down the ladder. I returned once more to the storage room and found flashlights, spare batteries, a portable toolkit, and 3 coils of climbing rope used for underside inspections. Those went down as well. When I came back up the final time, the sound at the bridge had intensified. Glass vibrated under repeated pressure. The figures outside had multiplied. They pressed against the sealed doors not out of strategy, but instinct. Something about movement inside must have drawn them earlier. Or maybe they were just converging naturally. I didn't wait to analyze. I descended the ladder for the last time and pulled the hatch closed. From below, I secured it with the steel brace and tightened the locking bolts until they bit into the frame. Then I returned to the steel door of the maintenance room and shut it firmly. The deadbolt slid home. Above, the impacts continued faintly for several minutes. Then gradually they dispersed. Sound travels strangely in the canyon. But inside reinforced concrete, the noise became distant, manageable. I looked around the maintenance room. Water stacked along one wall. Food crates sorted by type. Sanitation supplies organized into labeled bins. Rope coils hung from steel hooks. Medical kits placed within reach. The gift shop above might look emptied now. But down here, the storage room had become survival. And the last open corridor between me and the canyon had just been sealed. Water was the real clock. The cases I hauled down would last weeks if rationed carefully. Maybe longer if I reduced intake to survival minimums. But a canyon does not promise rain, and the Skywalk had never been designed to collect it. It had been designed to shed it. The outer lip of the platform curved slightly downward to prevent pooling on the glass. During storms, runoff spilled cleanly over the edge and vanished into open air. That was fine for tourism. It was a problem for survival. I needed to reverse gravity's convenience. The next morning, I climbed back up through the hatch before sunrise, when wind was minimal and movement below sparse. The glass deck was coated in fine dust from overnight gusts, and faint handprints still marked where bodies had pressed against the bridge doors. They had moved on. For now, I walked the perimeter carefully, studying the drainage seams along the curved outer edge. The steel frame beneath the glass included small inspection gaps where water funneled downward into concealed channels. If I could intercept that flow before it dropped into the canyon, I could redirect it inward. Back in the maintenance room, I gathered flexible conduit tubing, industrial sealant, and 2 wide plastic collection bins from the cleaning storage. Then I went back up. Working low and fast, I attached short conduit extensions beneath two drainage points along the outer rim. The tubes angled inward, secured with clamps and reinforced with sealant so they wouldn't detach under wind load. I routed both lines through a narrow gap near the underside beam and down toward the maintenance hatch, where I positioned one collection bin directly beneath. It wasn't elegant, but it would capture runoff instead of surrendering it to the void. Condensation was the second source. At night, temperature differences between the glass panels and the air above the canyon caused moisture to bead along the steel support beams beneath the platform. Normally, it evaporated by mid-morning. I attached absorbent cloth strips along those beams and positioned a second collection container beneath the lowest drip points. Yield would be minimal, but minimal multiplied over days becomes measurable. Back inside the maintenance room, I reorganized water storage into three categories: sealed original bottles, captured runoff pending filtration, and purified reserves. The propane heating plate would be used sparingly to boil captured water. Fuel consumption for purification had to be factored into the total survival timeline. I measured burn time for 1 liter and logged it on the concrete wall with a grease pencil. Sanitation required equal discipline. The maintenance room had a floor drain originally tied into the visitor center plumbing. With the grid unstable, I did not trust that system. Instead, I converted one of the heavy-duty cleaning buckets into a sealed waste unit lined with double trash bags and layered disinfectant. Odor control wasn't about comfort. It was about containment. Confined air accumulates pathogens quickly. Each evening, I wiped surfaces with diluted industrial cleaner and sealed waste tightly before lowering it by rope into a canyon-side crevice well away from the platform's support anchors. Distance mattered. Nothing could accumulate beneath me. By the 4th day, the first measurable rainfall passed through the canyon. Light brief, but enough to test the system. Water trickled through the conduit lines and dripped steadily into the collection bin. I stood there watching it like it was currency. Because it was. Above 4,000 feet of open air, survival wasn't about fighting anything. It was about redirecting what would otherwise be lost. And every drop that reached the bin instead of the canyon floor was one less reason to descend. The skywalk was engineered for weight, not emptiness. When hundreds of tourists moved across the glass, their footsteps dampened the wind's rhythm. Sound scattered across laughter and nervous commentary. Motion stabilized perception. The platform felt alive because it was occupied. Without people, every gust felt personal. The first major wind system rolled through 3 days after I finished the water diversion lines. It came from the west, pushing across the canyon rim in long, sustained waves rather than sharp bursts. From inside the maintenance room, I felt it as a low tremor through the concrete core. Up on the glass, it was different. I climbed through the hatch just before midday and stepped onto the platform. The wind struck immediately, flattening my jacket against my chest and humming across the steel railing in a rising tone. The glass beneath my boots vibrated, not visibly but perceptibly. The skywalk flexed within engineered tolerances. It was designed to move slightly under load to distribute stress along anchor cables drilled deep into canyon rock. But without crowd noise to mask it, the movement felt exaggerated. Wind is louder when there's nothing else. I walked the curve slowly, eyes scanning for microfractures along the panel seams. Each glass section was reinforced, layered, rated to hold multiple tons. But canyon grit works like sandpaper over time. Hairline stress marks form invisibly until they don't. At the outermost arc, I knelt and inspected the expansion joint where 2 panels met. The sealant showed minor wear, nothing structural yet, but enough to justify reinforcement. I returned below for industrial epoxy and applied a thin stabilizing bead along the seam. Back inside the maintenance room, I checked anchor tension monitors mounted along the concrete wall. They measured cable strain in real time, displaying minor fluctuations as wind load shifted. The readings remained within safe margins. Still, I didn't trust only numbers. I climbed halfway down the inspection ladder beneath the platform, clipped into the safety line, and examined the primary anchor bolts drilled into the canyon wall. They were massive steel rods thicker than my wrist, embedded into rock. Dust had accumulated along their edges, but no visible displacement. The canyon amplifies wind in strange ways. Thermals rise from the floor unpredictably, creating upward drafts that strike the underside of the platform at irregular intervals. Each time it happened, the glass emitted a faint, hollow resonance. The platform was never meant for silence. It was meant to feel crowded, to feel stable through shared presence. Now every movement felt exposed. Below, I saw figures drifting along the visitor center perimeter again. The broken staircase I had severed earlier hung useless against the cliff face. No one attempted to climb it. Most wouldn't. Height is psychological. Even those who once paid to stand here struggled to look straight down. That fear now worked in my favor. As afternoon turned to evening, the wind intensified further. I secured loose items on the platform and descended to the maintenance room, sealing the hatch tightly. Concrete absorbed vibration better than glass. Inside, I logged wind direction, estimated gust intervals, and strain readings from the cable monitors. Routine steadied thought. Above me, the platform continued to flex and hum against open air. Below me, 4,000 feet of canyon dropped into shadow. The skywalk had never been designed for this kind of silence. But it was holding, and as long as it held, height remained advantage. From the glass, the visitor center looked smaller than it had ever felt when I worked there. Distance changes scale. The parking lot that once seemed crowded now looked like a scattered toy set. Cars frozen at odd angles, doors left open, luggage abandoned in place. Wind pushed debris across the asphalt in restless patterns. The infected drifted through it in slow arcs. They moved without direction, without formation. Occasionally, one would stumble into another, both collapsing briefly before rising again. From 4,000 feet above the canyon floor, they looked almost harmless. Almost. I leaned against the railing and studied the bridge. The curved glass walkway connecting the skywalk to the visitor center extended roughly 70 feet across open air. It had once been lined with tourists gripping railings, laughing nervously, taking photos of the canyon beneath their feet. Now it stood empty. The sealed glass doors at the visitor center entrance remained intact. Smudged, scratched, but unbroken. One of the infected approached the bridge slowly, hands brushing along the exterior wall. It reached the glass and pressed its palm flat against it, staring through. For a moment, it didn't move. Then it stepped onto the bridge. The shift was immediate. Its posture changed. Head tilted downward. Feet slowed. Glass beneath you forces awareness. Even without understanding height intellectually, the body reacts to transparency. The figure staggered halfway across before dropping to its knees. Whether from fear, imbalance, or simple instinct, it crawled backward off the bridge and retreated toward the parking lot. Another approached later. Same result. They could not cross the gap. Height wasn't just physical separation. It was psychological defense. The canyon yawned beneath the bridge like a warning no one had to read to understand. I watched for hours. Some of the infected gathered near the base of the visitor center entrance, packing in loose clusters. None attempted the broken exterior staircase along the cliff face. None tried climbing the steel support beams beneath the skywalk. Most threats below lacked either coordination or courage to attempt vertical ascent. But humans were different. I spotted them near dusk. 3 figures emerging from the access road ridge, moving deliberately. They avoided the densest clusters in the parking lot, circling wide and keeping distance from the visitor center doors. They saw the skywalk. They stopped. One raised binoculars. From this height, I couldn't see their expressions. But I could see posture shift, evaluating, measuring, assessing the gap. They did not attempt the bridge immediately. Instead, they walked along the canyon rim, scanning the underside of the platform and the cliff face below it. looking for alternative routes. I stepped back from the railing and lowered myself slightly behind the glass barrier. Even from this height, visibility is reciprocal. The trio eventually retreated toward the ridge road without attempting entry. But the difference was clear. The infected could not cross the gap. Humans might try. I returned to the maintenance room and double-checked the hatch brace and steel door lock. The canyon below swallowed noise easily. Sound traveled unpredictably through stone. Height had given me protection from chaos, but it had also made me visible to anyone patient enough to look up. For now, the bridge remained barrier enough. They couldn't cross it. Yet, they came back with equipment. 3 days after I first saw them with binoculars, a group of 5 appeared along the ridge road just after sunrise. 2 vehicles parked at an angle near the broken exterior staircase I had severed earlier. They didn't approach the bridge this time. They approached the canyon wall. I was already on the platform, checking water runoff lines when I spotted them. Through the glass, I watched one of them uncoil rope from the back of the SUV. Another unpacked climbing harness. They moved with practiced efficiency, not tourists improvising, but people who understood vertical terrain. That changed the threat calculation. The canyon wall beneath the skywalk wasn't smooth. It was jagged, layered, full of natural ledges and fractures. Difficult, dangerous, but not impossible. If they could rappel down from the rim and traverse laterally toward the underside of the platform, they might find anchor beams or maintenance access points. And once beneath it, the maintenance hatch became vulnerability. I moved fast, back through the hatch, down into the maintenance room, and into the tool rack where the heavy bolt kit was stored. Then back up onto the platform and down the inspection ladder that ran along the underside frame. Wind buffeted harder at this angle. I clipped into the safety line and descended until I reached the primary underside anchor beam, a thick steel girder running parallel to the canyon wall. From here, I could see them clearly now. One climber had already descended halfway down the canyon face, boots braced against rock, rope taut above him. Another prepared to follow. They were aiming for the natural shelf about 20 feet below the underside of the platform, a staging point. Smart. I reached the secondary anchor ring welded into the girder. It had been used for maintenance rappel work in the past. If they reached this level and found it, they could attach their own lines. I unbolted it. The ring detached cleanly, leaving only a flush steel plate. No easy anchor. Below, the first climber reached the shelf and looked upward, scanning for connection points. He tested the rock with one hand and began moving laterally along the wall. I shifted to the next beam junction and loosened 2 removable guide hooks used for cleaning harness setups. Each one fell away into open air, clanging briefly before vanishing into canyon depth. Wind swallowed the sound. The climber below reached the approximate vertical line beneath the skywalk and stopped. He stared upward. At this distance, I could see him calculating. No anchor ring. No visible rung. Just smooth steel. The second climber descended and joined him on the shelf. They spoke briefly, gestures sharp and frustrated. One attempted to throw a rope upward. It fell short by several feet. The platform overhang prevented easy lassoing of structural elements. That overhang had been designed for aesthetics and load balance, not defense. But today it functioned as both. After 15 minutes of probing and failed attempts, they began climbing back upward. Controlled, disciplined. This wasn't reckless desperation. It was reconnaissance. They would adjust. I climbed back up to the main platform and watched as the group regrouped near their vehicles. One pointed toward the bridge. Another gestured toward the canyon wall again, likely mapping alternative angles. They hadn't breached, but they had tested. The infected below still wandered aimlessly around the visitor center, incapable of organizing ascent. Humans were not. I returned to the maintenance room and inventoried rope supply again. If descent ever became necessary, I would use it. But for now, it also meant someone else could. I reinforced the maintenance hatch with a secondary crossbar and tightened every bolt along its frame. They had tried to climb the canyon wall. They would try again. Height buys time. It does not eliminate ambition. The fire started where I expected it would. In the visitor center. It was mid-afternoon when I saw the first thin plume rising from the gift shop roofline below. Not black at first, gray. Then darker. Then thick. I was on the platform, rerouting a condensation line when the smell reached me. Burned plastic. Carpet. Insulation. The infected had no concept of fire. They had likely knocked something over inside the building. An overturned display, a broken electrical fixture, maybe even a generator flare from the raiders' earlier visit. Whatever sparked it didn't matter. What mattered was thermals. Canyon air doesn't rise straight up. It spirals. Heat builds along rock faces and accelerates upward through natural funnels. And I was standing above one of them. Within minutes, the gray plume thickened and began curling upward along the canyon wall toward the underside of the skywalk. Smoke under my feet. I dropped to one knee and inspected the glass panels beneath me. The platform was reinforced and rated for extreme temperature fluctuations, but prolonged radiant heat could stress the sealants between panes. I moved fast, back through the maintenance hatch, down into the core. I sealed the ventilation slit immediately and closed the duct covers I had fabricated earlier. No smoke could enter the maintenance room if the exterior vents were sealed tightly. Then I grabbed a thermal monitor from the structural kit, normally used to measure expansion during peak summer heat, and climbed halfway down the underside inspection ladder. The air temperature was rising. Not enough to warp steel yet, but enough to register. Above me, faint popping sounds echoed as glass panels adjusted to rapid temperature change. Below, the visitor center roof collapsed inward with a deep, hollow boom. Flames shot upward through the broken frame, sending a blast of superheated air directly into the canyon updraft. The platform shuddered once. Not violently, but distinctly. Heat expands steel. Steel shifts load. Load redistributes through anchor cables drilled into canyon rock. I pressed my gloved hand against the underside beam. Hotter. I climbed back up to the glass deck and moved to the outermost curve, peering downward carefully. Flames licked the broken shell of the visitor center. Smoke poured upward, thick and choking. The infected still drifted around the perimeter, occasionally catching fire themselves before stumbling away in slow arcs of smoldering fabric. The canyon amplified everything. Sound, heat, movement. I returned to the maintenance room and monitored the anchor strain readings. Minor fluctuation. Within tolerance. The skywalk was built to endure desert heat far worse than this, but desert heat spreads evenly. Fire concentrates. I filled 2 water containers and carried them up to the hatch. Not to douse anything. That would be useless, but to cool critical seam areas if the glass temperature spiked too fast. For nearly an hour, the fire roared. Then, gradually, it began to consume itself. Roof materials collapsed inward. Fuel exhausted. Flames shortened. Smoke thinned. The platform temperature stabilized slowly, metal cooling in careful increments. By dusk, the visitor center was a charred skeleton. No more bridge traffic. No more gift shop. Only blackened beams and melted signage. The path back across the canyon was gone. Not blocked. Gone. I stood alone on the glass, looking down at what used to be the only land access to the skywalk. Height had saved me. Fire had erased retreat. And the canyon, indifferent as ever, swallowed the smoke and left me suspended above nothing but air. Winter in the canyon doesn't announce itself with snow. It arrives as cold that settles into stone. The first frost came overnight, thin and silent. I felt it before I saw it, the maintenance room colder than usual, breath visible in the dim light of my headlamp. When I climbed up through the hatch at dawn, The glass platform shimmered faintly beneath a thin sheet of ice. Transparent ice on transparent floor. That changes the rules. I stepped carefully onto the platform, boots testing friction before committing weight. The glass panels were reinforced, but ice doesn't care about strength. It cares about traction. One misstep near the outer curve, and balance becomes negotiation with gravity. 4,000 feet is not forgiving. Wind was calmer than it had been in autumn, but colder. Canyon thermals weakened in winter, reducing upward drafts, but increasing unpredictable side gusts that slid across the rim without warning. I moved slowly along the arc, inspecting seams. Ice formed first along the metal expansion joints, creeping inward over the glass in thin spiderweb patterns. If it thickened unevenly, it could create localized stress during thaw cycles. Back in the maintenance room, I retrieved a long-handled squeegee and a plastic scraper. Metal tools risked scratching the reinforced surface. I returned to the platform and began clearing ice methodically, panel by panel. It wasn't about aesthetics. It was about load. Even a thin layer across hundreds of square feet adds weight. Weight shifts anchor tension. Tension shifts balance. As I worked, I glanced toward the burned remains of the visitor center. The structure was skeletal now, charred beams standing like broken ribs. The infected had mostly dispersed from the area, wandering along the ridge road or vanishing into the canyon scrub. The human group hadn't returned since the failed climbing attempt. Cold discourages risk. By midday, sunlight began softening the ice near the inner arc of the platform. Meltwater ran toward the outer rim, dripping into the diversion tubes I had installed weeks earlier. Water yield improved slightly during thaw. Small advantage. Back inside, I reinforced insulation around the maintenance room door, using spare thermal blankets from the emergency kit. The concrete walls retained cold longer than heat, and generator cycles were reduced further to conserve fuel. I layered clothing constantly now, base layer thermal outer jacket, even indoors. Movement slowed naturally in cold environments. Muscles stiffen. Reaction time decreases. Height magnifies consequence. On the third consecutive freeze, wind returned sharply at dusk. Ice reformed quickly along the outer railing, creating a shimmering edge against the canyon void. I stood at the center of the platform, looking down through clear panels at layers of red rock descending into shadow. Transparent floors in winter feel different. In summer, tourists feared them. Now they reminded me how little separated me from the canyon below. The skywalk had endured fire. It had endured wind. Now it endured cold. I returned to the maintenance room and logged temperature fluctuations, ice thickness estimates, and anchor strain readings. Routine steadied thought. Above me, the glass creaked faintly as it contracted under night air. Below me, the canyon floor vanished into darkness. Ice on transparent floors is temporary. But winter doesn't test strength. It tests patience. And patience at altitude is survival. Silence in the canyon isn't empty. It echoes. When wind drops and the glass stops humming, the only sound left is the faint settling of steel and the distant shift of air against rock. In those moments, the skywalk feels less like a structure and more like a suspended thought. I began talking to myself during the third week of winter. Not full conversations, just observations spoken aloud while tightening bolts or boiling water. Anchor tension normal. Fuel at 32%. A hatch secure. Hearing my own voice kept it from dissolving entirely. The canyon doesn't answer back. It absorbs. Days settled into sequence. Morning, clear ice from the inner arc if needed. Inspect anchor monitors. Check water capture lines for freezing blockages. Midday, run the generator for a limited burn cycle. Recharge batteries. Boil and filter condensation yield. Afternoon, observation sweep. Scan Ridge Road. Scan burned visitor center remains. Watch for movement patterns shifting. Evening, sanitation routine. Log entries on the concrete wall. Seal waste and lower it into a narrow rock crevice away from anchor lines. Repetition preserved clarity. Without it, imagination fills space. One night, wind shifted abruptly and carried a faint metallic clatter upward from the canyon rim. I froze mid-step, listening. It repeated. Not random. Measured. I climbed halfway up through the hatch and peered through the narrow slit between the barricade carts. Headlights, far along the ridge road. Not close enough to threaten, but close enough to exist. Vehicles still moved. Organized groups still patrolled. I retreated quietly. Visibility from above is advantage, but light can betray. I began placing reflective signal markers along the outer railing, small strips of mirrored tape angled toward the sky, invisible from below but potentially visible from aircraft or high-elevation drones. Hope is a risk, but so is stagnation. If any aircraft still cross the canyon airspace, military, private, rescue, they might catch the reflection. Each morning, I checked for contrails overhead. None. The radio remained mostly silent. Occasionally, static shifted into faint distortion. I limited transmissions to once every 3 days now. Skywalk position secure. Elevation stable. Short. Neutral. No invitation. The canyon swallowed the signal. But I kept sending it. One afternoon, while cleaning frost from the inner glass panels, I caught my reflection staring back at me. Thin, unshaven, eyes scanning constantly even when nothing moved. Height isolates more than distance. It isolates thought. The maintenance room remained intact. Supplies steady. Water yielded minimal but sustainable. I wasn't starving. I wasn't freezing. But I was alone above everything. And the canyon, magnificent and merciless, offered no response to routine or reflection. It simply remained. 4,000 feet below, rock strata recorded time in layers. Above it, I recorded time in grease pencil on concrete. The canyon doesn't answer back. So I keep writing anyway. The signal came at dawn. I had just finished a brief transmission. Short, controlled, the same phrase I'd used for weeks. Skywalk position secure. Elevation stable. Usually static swallowed it whole. This time static broke. Elevated platform, copy transmission, downstream settlement operational. Advise caution on ridge routes. The voice was faint but structured. Not panicking. Not fragmented. Structured meant organized. I froze with my hand, still resting on the radio. Repeat, I said, keeping my tone steady. A pause. Then river basin secured. Limited intake. Raider groups active along the canyon rim. Avoid high-visibility structures. High-visibility structures. The Skywalk. They knew places like this would attract attention. I stepped up through the hatch and moved to the outer railing, scanning downstream along the canyon's curve. From this height, distance compresses into geometry. I could see the river far below, winding between rock shelves, but nothing that resembled settlement infrastructure. That didn't mean it wasn't there. Structures near water could be hidden beneath overhangs or canyon bends. Confirm location. I transmitted. Static flared briefly then, 2 miles past Southern Bend. Smoke signals controlled. Do not approach Ridge Road. Repeat, do not approach Ridge Road. That aligned with what I had seen. Vehicles at night. Organized patrols. If a settlement existed downstream, raiders would use the rim as lookout and choke point. Descending into the canyon floor would mean bypassing that visibility, but it would also mean committing to rope and rock with no guarantee of safety below. I powered down the radio and leaned against the steel railing. The visitor center was gone. The bridge was gone. The only path back to civilization, if it existed, was vertical. Rappel down canyon rock. Navigate unstable terrain. Cross river basin. Hope the voice on the radio wasn't a trap. I returned to the maintenance room, and uncoiled one of the climbing ropes. Inspected it for fray, weakness, abrasion. The harness still hung from its hook, unused since the last structural inspection before the outbreak. Height had saved me, but height was finite. Food reserves were thinning faster now, despite careful rationing. Winter had limited water yield for weeks. Fuel sat at just under 25%. I climbed halfway down the underside ladder and looked toward the canyon wall again. The descent path was clear. Rock ledges staggered unevenly, but enough existed to make gradual progression possible. I imagined the reverse scenario, raiders attempting the same descent upward. Harder, exposed, visible. Advantage remained mine if I moved first. Back inside, I wrote a final entry on the concrete wall, rope inspected. Fuel 22%. Water moderate. Settlement confirmed downstream. I stood in the center of the maintenance room and listened. No movement above. No vehicles on the ridge. No climbing attempts along the wall. Fortress still intact. But fortress and prison are separated by intent. I clipped the harness onto the anchor hook and left it there, ready. I haven't descended yet, but for the first time, I am not securing doors. I am measuring distance. And distance, unlike walls, eventually demands crossing. Dawn came quiet. No wind. No movement on the ridge road. The canyon held its breath the way it does before heat rises from the stone. I powered the radio for one short window. Skywalk position stable. Considering descent. Confirm basin status. Static filled the first few seconds. Then the voice returned, faint but controlled. River basin secure for now. Raiders active north rim. Movement is safer at first light. Avoid exposed ridge for now. That was the only guarantee left anywhere. I shut the radio down and stepped onto the glass. Below me, the canyon dropped into layers of shadow and red stone. Downstream, the thin line of smoke still rose in a straight, deliberate column. Proof of structure. Proof of life. Behind me, the maintenance room waited, concrete organized, measured. Water stacked carefully. Fuel logged precisely. Rope anchored and ready. Height saved me. Fire erased retreat. Winter tested endurance. Humans tested access. The canyon remained. I stood at the outer curve of the skywalk and looked straight down through transparent panels at 4,000 feet of air. I haven't left the skywalk yet, but I no longer mistake it for forever. The ropes are ready, and when I descend, it will be on my terms, not because I was pushed, but because I chose to move.